Welcome to NCS4 Research Seminar Series. I'm Brandon Allen, Director of Research of NCS4 and Associate Teaching Professor, Sport Management at the University of Southern Mississippi. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Andy Rudd as our presenter for this seminar. Dr. Rudd is an Associate Professor of Sport Management at Franklin Pierce University. Dr. Rudd's research interests include character development in sport, sport spectator aggression, sportsmanship, and moral judgment in sport management. Dr. Rudd will present his research on sportsmanship attitudes as a moderator of the relationship between team identification and spectator aggression. In this presentation, Dr. Rudd will discuss how fan aggression has become a problem in sports. He will provide insight into the relationship that team identification has on spectator aggression and offer a non-traditional approach to reduce aggression fan behavior. Dr. Rudd, we look forward to listening to your research.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brandon. It's a pleasure to get this opportunity to present some of my most recent research concerning spectator aggression, specifically in the context of college athletics. I have been studying spectator aggression in college athletics for about 15 years now. And as Brandon introduced, I'm going to share a study that I somewhat recently conducted in which I wanted to see how sportsmanship attitudes could possibly moderate the relationship between fans with high levels of team identification and then also high levels of spectator aggression. And so just to start off with, just to clarify how I have conceptualized aggression for my work and for this particular study, I use Jay Coakley's definition of aggression. And so you can see here, he says aggression refers to verbal or physical actions grounded in an intent to dominate, control, or do harm to another person. And so I like this definition because it covers both verbal and physical actions, which are, we certainly see cases of both verbal and physical aggression coming from spectators or fans. And then also the clarification on intention. And so the intent can be either to dominate, control, or do harm to another person. And so I've got some examples of what that could look like. The first one, ridiculing opposing players, game officials, and other fans. So there are many cases in which spectators engage in various, I guess you could say, name calling, insults, harassment towards players, game officials, other fans. And they might be doing that to try to throw off or diminish the player's ability to perform. And so we might say that in that case, there's an attempt to dominate or control the opposing players. There may be intentions to just simply do harm, psychological harm, or even perhaps physical harm if, as you can see in the third bullet point, that sometimes fans resort to actually throwing objects at opposing players, game officials, and other fans. So the second bullet point there, I think, says a lot. This is a quote from the late Miles Brand, and he was also at one time the president of the National Collegiate Athletic Association. And when I read this quote from him, 16 years ago, it really piqued my interest, really stimulated my desire to want to start studying spectator aggression, particularly within the context of college athletics. And so he said, campuses increasingly have student sections in football and basketball that have taken on the role of ensuring a home court advantage with zealous enthusiasm that sometimes moves from rowdy support to over-the-top vulgarity and violent action. And I think that really captures much of what, well, certainly not every fan, but many fans that engage in these types of really unruly, vicious attacks on opposing players, on game officials, and other fans. And then in 2015, Justin Gubar wrote a really interesting book called Fanaticus. And in part of that book, she really did a deep dive into college sports fans, student fans, college student fans, and discovered that there are a lot of specialized student groups, such as the Cameron Crazies, the Show, the Pit Crew. There's many others at colleges and universities that have these groups of students that basically are dedicated to harassing and insulting the opposing players. You know, one of the things that I know that they like to do, just from talking with other college students, is they will put together what they call a fact sheet. And they will find out as many different things as they can about the opposing players, and they will use that personal information to harass the opposing team and to, I think, hopefully try to throw them off their game and cause them to play poorly. And then here on this slide, in addition to showing that an even more recent example in 2021, where University of Tennessee fans were actually throwing objects at opposing players and at the coach, which resulted in a $250,000 fine from the Southeastern Conference for their behavior. And then some studies here that I have done, and certainly I'm not the only one to be studying spectator aggression. In particular, Daniel Wan, who is very well known for all of his work on spectator aggression. But he has his work is a bit different than mine in that he has been much more interested over the years in looking at different variables that would predict spectator aggression. And a variable that I'm going to talk about that he's done a lot of work on is team identification, and I'll get to that in a minute. But these studies here are more descriptive studies because I wanted to try to get more of a sense of just how extensive this problem is with fan behavior. And so in the first study there back in 2010, we did a combination of interviews and surveying of college student basketball fans. And we wanted them to tell us about the types of spectator aggression that they engage in, and just how many of them actually engage in it. And so you can see there that we found that 52 out of 137 in our sample self-reported the use of various forms of heckling and harassment towards the opponent, so 38%. And then in another study that I did back in 2016, I created a sports spectator aggression scale, and I wanted to get a sense of college sports spectators' attitudes towards aggression. And so just some highlights there showing that says the sample of 221 college student fans, the majority agreed or tended to agree that it is fair to heckle opposing players. That was 77% that said that. 75% thought it was agreed that it was okay to yell at the referee or umpire, and then 65% agreed or tended to agree that it's okay to ridicule the rival teams. So a pretty high percentage of college student fans from that sample that were in support of various forms of spectator aggression. And then in the last study there, that was where I wanted to get the perspective of the athletes and what they experience from fans in terms of spectator aggression. And one of the things that I found was that 47% from a sample of 108 Division II athletes indicated that they have been harassed, or insulted at one time or another while they are competing. So this is just kind of giving a kind of a broad view of the problem that exists in college athletics. And so, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of work in the area of team identification. Team identification has been found to have a positive relationship with spectator aggression. And, you know, for those of you that may be unfamiliar with this construct called team identification, in short, it basically concerns or refers to individuals having a psychological or emotional connection to a sport team. And it's to the extent that it impacts their self-esteem. In other words, they need their teams that they are psychologically connected to perform well. It's an important part of their identity. And as a result, they can become very upset, frustrated, angry if their team is not winning. It can be a threat to their identity. And so that's basically the theory in terms of why team identification would be linked to spectator aggression. And so you can see there are some various studies that have shown the relationship between team identification and spectator aggression. And then on the other side of the coin with team identification has also been strongly linked to sport consumption. And so sport marketers have done a lot of studying of team identification as it relates to sport consumption, and have found that individuals that have a strong level of team identification with their sports teams are much more likely to have stronger purchasing intentions, more likely to purchase tickets and attend games, and also purchase merchandise. So you can see a quote from Galen Trail in 2003, in which he said, "Because of the strong role played by team identification in spectator loyalty and behavior, building high levels of identification is important to sport marketers and managers." And so that really got me thinking, how can sport marketers and sport administrators build team identification while also controlling the aggressive fan behavior? So if sport marketers of sports teams think that it's important to build high levels of team identification among their sports fans, yet on the other hand, we know that individuals that are highly identified with their teams are also more likely to act aggressively. How do we mitigate the effects then of having this problem with high levels of team identification and acting aggressively, while also wanting these individuals to be attending games, purchasing merchandise, and so forth? So my idea relates to building higher levels, higher appreciation of sportsmanship, what I call spectator sportsmanship, among fans. And interestingly, the National Collegiate Athletic Association promotes the importance of sportsmanship. It is one of their core values, and they have what is called the Respect Campaign, which is a program designed to promote sportsmanship across colleges and universities. However, we still see this problem, this existing problem of unruly, aggressive behavior from many sports fans. So why isn't this Respect Campaign seeming to be more effective? I can tell all of you just from with my own institution, where I am a professor, that our institution is not involved in the Respect Campaign as far as I can see. There's really no mention of or any indication that sportsmanship is really being promoted And I've seen this at other colleges and universities as well. So is there something else that needs to be done beyond just campaigning and promoting sportsmanship? And so I wanted to conduct a study to try to show basically evidence that sportsmanship is important, that it can mitigate or moderate the relationship between team identification and spectator aggression. And then if I could show that in my study, then that would lend stronger support to doing more to foster sportsmanship, which I will talk about in just a little bit. So before I show you the study that I conducted, just want to clarify what sportsmanship is. And there are a number of different definitions that exist. And I picked a few definitions that I thought would relate well to spectators. And so, first of all, sportsmanship is more than simply following rules or fair play. It's really something that is more noble, something that's much more loftier than just simply following the rules, or simply refraining from being aggressive. And so you can see Arnold suggested that sportsmanship is concerned with fostering an atmosphere of friendliness, cooperation, and fellowship among players. And so I thought, well, could we also try to foster an atmosphere of friendliness, cooperation, and fellowship among the fans? Instead of fans feeling like the opposing team is the enemy, that fans who are wearing a jersey from the other team, that those individuals are the enemy, that could we try to somehow change the way fans are thinking and to think more in terms of this idea of being friendly, having fellowship. And then Clifford and Fiesel proposed that respect for one's opponent is at the heart of sportsmanship, because without opponents, and more specifically good opponents, there is no opportunity to excel and be tested. I really love this idea. I think it really brings into question, why would fans want to insult, harass, essentially bring down psychologically the opposing players of another team, when it's so important to have teams to play against? Without a team to play against, there's no sport. So, and I think fans want to see good competitions. They want to see excellence in terms of the skills of the players. And so it's a contradiction, I think, to insult and devalue and try to diminish one's opponent when, in fact, the fans need their teams to have opponents. And so why not try to build a stronger valuing of respect towards the opponent? So these are my hypotheses that I tested through statistical analysis. And so the first one is there will be basically a statistically significant positive relationship between team identification and spectator aggression attitudes. And then with the second hypothesis, there will be a negative relationship between sportsmanship attitudes and spectator aggression attitudes. And so with that one, the idea is that individuals that have a higher valuing of sportsmanship would be less supportive of spectator aggression, and vice versa. And then with the last hypothesis, sportsmanship attitudes will moderate the relationship between team identification and spectator aggression. The idea there being that those individuals with higher levels, higher valuing of sportsmanship, we would not see as strong of a relationship or basically a weak relationship between team identification and spectator aggression among those individuals that have higher valuing of sportsmanship. So we had a convenience sample of 213 participants, males 120, females 93. Importantly, when we administered the questionnaire out on social media websites and also in college classrooms, we clarified to people that they had to be college sports fans. And then again, the importance there of letting them know that it was going to be anonymous so that they would hopefully feel comfortable responding to the questionnaire and the scales that are contained on that questionnaire. And these are the scales that were a part of the questionnaire. And so we use the Sports Spectator Identification Scale to measure team identification, the Sports Spectator Attitude Scale to measure spectator aggression attitudes, and then the Sports Spectator Sportsmanship Scale to measure sportsmanship attitudes. So in case you're thinking all about this issue of attitudes, just to clarify, we did not measure an individual's actual sportsmanship behavior at a sporting event. We didn't measure a person's aggression at a sporting event in terms of like how frequently do you act aggressively at a sporting event, say. But this was just, these are statements that they read, and then it's an attitude towards those statements that involve aggression, that involve sportsmanship. And I have examples there. So the first example, how important to you is it that your favorite college sport team wins? And that's on a scale from 1 to 8, not important to very important. And so that's an example of the team identification measure. And then for the spectator aggression measure, an example of an item is heckling the opposing players is fair because the rival fans will do the same thing when my team is visiting at their arena or stadium. And so there's a scale there from agree to disagree. And then with the sportsmanship scale, an example, I think it is wrong to yell at or harass the opponent so that they will play poorly. And again, agree to disagree. So for the data analysis, we used hierarchical multiple regression to determine if sportsmanship attitudes moderated the relationship between team identification and spectator aggression. And then also did some descriptive analyses as well. And so then for the results, in the first regression model, team identification and spectator aggression were statistically significant predictors of spectator aggression, explaining 47% of the variance. And then in the second model, that's where I wanted to see if sportsmanship attitudes could moderate the relationship between team identification and spectator aggression. And unfortunately, you can see there in that last bullet point that there was no R-squared change. So there was no additional explaining of variance. Sportsmanship attitudes did not, really did not at all moderate the relationship between team identification and spectator aggression, which was a little disappointing. However, if we look at the correlation analysis, with the second bullet point there was a statistically significant negative correlation between sports spectator aggression and spectator sportsmanship. And it's a very strong correlation at 0.68. And so that was very encouraging to me to see that, yes, indeed, individuals that have a, positive attitude of valuing of spectator sportsmanship are individuals who are not going to support spectator aggression. And so I felt that that result does lend support to my idea to promote sportsmanship more and to provide sportsmanship education, which I'll show all of you in just a second. So the idea here with the sportsmanship education, going beyond just simply promoting sportsmanship, but actually putting individuals through an educational process. And I'm basing this idea off of earlier work that's been done concerning moral education. And it's been found that moral education, and more specifically using a moral discussion approach, engaging people in moral dialogue, can increase an individual's level of moral reasoning or moral development, and that these moral education programs can be effective somewhere from about 4 weeks to 12 weeks. So when you can provide this education over anywhere from a 4 to 12-week period, that's when they are typically most effective. And then also there with that third bullet point, that sportsmanship education could be used to increase a person's knowing, valuing, and doing. And what I'm saying there, I'm borrowing from, you can see there, Thomas Lacona, and his work that he's done on character development. And so the knowing, the valuing, and doing, what that's saying there is that it's very important if you want to build character among individuals, is that they have to know what character is, they have to be able to value character, and then they have to actually put that into action. That's the doing part. So I think that same model could apply to sportsmanship as well. So do people know what sportsmanship is to begin with? Secondly, do they value sportsmanship? And then lastly, do they value it enough that they would actually practice sportsmanship? And I think that's where sportsmanship education could really be helpful in developing that knowing, valuing, and doing. And so just to be a little more, I guess, a little more detail on this, as far as what the sportsmanship education would look like, the idea would be to engage people in discussion, engage fans in discussions about sportsmanship, about different types of scenarios that can occur at a sporting event, to attempt to try to put them into cognitive dissonance, because that's really a really key aspect with moral education, is to put individuals into a state of cognitive dissonance. So challenge what individuals currently believe about competition in sport, and begin to get them to a point where maybe they are beginning to question what they believe, what they had originally thought about what it means to compete, or how to treat one's opponent or opposing fans, and to give them an alternative view, and to do that through the discussion. And also, it's very important that people are able to hear what other people think about sportsmanship, about spectator aggression, and individuals that have a higher valuing of sportsmanship, as they speak and they talk about what their views are, that can have kind of a role modeling effect on other individuals in the class. So that's my idea for what sportsmanship education could look like. As far as implementing it, I recognize that it could be challenging. Yeah, so before I go into some promoting ideas, just a couple more things on the sportsmanship education, what that would look like. One idea I have would be, could colleges and universities require a sportsmanship education program for all incoming freshmen? It could be something where it's a 4-week course, and they go through a sportsmanship education process. Could athletic departments provide incentives to fans to be willing to take some type of sportsmanship education program, maybe give discounts on, say, football tickets or basketball tickets, if they're willing to go through a sportsmanship education program. That might be another way. Because certainly I don't think it would be, I think certainly it'd be difficult to actually try and mandate that fans go through sportsmanship education. But if there could be ways to incentivize it, then perhaps that would be a better avenue. So then with the promoting of spectator sportsmanship, other tactics that could be used, and some of these things are in line with the respect campaign that the National Collegiate Athletic Association has. So for example, having sportsmanship athlete of the week or month. I know like at our institution, we have athlete of the week, but that's in terms of a athletic performance. That's not has anything to do with sportsmanship. So what about having a sportsmanship athlete of the week? Recognizing athletes for practicing sportsmanship. And could that then also kind of have a ripple effect on the fans? How about sportsmanship t-shirts? Could it be possible to give out t-shirts at college sporting events? Some kind of little slogan on the t-shirt that says something about sportsmanship. Having stadium signage, arena signage with sportsmanship messages, public announcements. I think it would be helpful instead of having whoever the individual is at a game that does the public announcements, actually having coaches and players. And again, if we're talking about like the big athletic programs, the big football stadiums, say, on the Jumbotron, having the coach, having players, gives messages about the importance of sportsmanship. I think all these kinds of things could create a stronger culture of practicing sportsmanship. And that concludes my presentation.
Great job. Thank you, Dr. Rose. Insight and research on spectator aggression, team identification, and spectator sportsmanship. I think colleges and universities should seek to promote spectator sportsmanship through a moral discussion education approach to reduce spectator aggression. That was a great presentation. We appreciate you coming on and presenting your research.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.